For the last 3 years, I've had issues with my gut, ranging from mild to somewhat debilitating at times. So in this video, I'm going to share with you some things that I've done that have helped me reduce those issues to nearly zero. Before we start, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm actually a gardener. I have a YouTube channel called Epic Gardening with a few million subscribers. That's my main business. This channel, if you're here, welcome. It's about business, life, philosophy, health, fitness, everything that has nothing to do with plants. So let's talk about the gut. These are some things that I did that actually really helped me. For a while, I did not feel like I had any end in sight from some of the issues I was experiencing. I would have acid reflux. I would have like sort of a distended belly. I would just feel generally uncomfortable or bloated in my skin and body, which is just not good for your daily life and your daily energy levels. And so the first thing I did, first three things in fact, were some pretty basic changes that aren't going to be shocking to you at all, but I'll give you the rationale for them. So the first one is I removed almost all sources of added sugar. And I say added sugar because a banana has no added sugar. A banana is a banana. So I could eat something like a banana or a peach or some strawberries or some berries or maybe a little bit of honey here and there, because that's what that product in nature actually is. But I had no Reese's, I had no Ben& Jerry's, I had no ice creams, nothing like that, because not only is it just better for your health, but what I found is that those foods tend to be processed and they tend to contain a lot of other compounds that can have issues in your gut. So by removing those, I noticed a little bit of relief in some of the gut symptoms, but this next one made a bigger difference. I myself have never been a big drinker. I had a little bit of a wild time in college, but even then it was nowhere near what the average college student experience would be like. And in fact, when I was in my early 20s, I kind of got like cured of that need to drink for social lubrication, because I had a gig where I would go out and give these medical surveys to people in bars. It was a survey about their smoking habits, and I get paid $5 for every single survey I gave out. So I was kind of optimizing the best way to give out these surveys, but there was one cardinal rule, is that you yourself could not be taking any substances whatsoever. You couldn't be smoking or you could not be drinking. And you're at a bar, so it's pretty tempting to want to grab a drink at the bar, especially when you're going up to these strangers and trying to give them this survey. But you couldn't. So I spent a couple months doing that gig on the evenings a couple times a week, and I got very familiar with being in environments where most people are drinking and I wasn't drinking. So I got very comfortable with just being sober and talking to random people, which was a good skill for life. But what I found is that even though I would maybe have 1 or 2 drinks a week max over the last couple years, it would still have a pretty big impact on my gut health, especially when I combined it with other types of food. Like if I was to have a cocktail and then maybe a little bit of ice cream for dessert, that dairy alcohol combo really was not working for me. So I think there's something to be said for combinations of food that maybe theoretically like shouldn't go together, and maybe depends on your own proclivity or what's going on in your individual gut, but I would be tracking this, and alcohol to me seems like a #1 culprit. The next thing I removed was frankly somewhat painful, and it was most sources of gluten, which would be the protein in most baked goods that makes them nice and stretchy, gives them a little bit of that texture. So the only caveat, and this was my saving grace, is that I allowed myself to eat fermented doughs, so sourdough. So what I've learned is that by consuming the sourdough, for some reason, that pre-fermentation process seems to maybe break down the gluten or break down most of the compounds in the bread to a greater degree and makes them more easily digestible, at least by my system. Because I even did a test. I ate a couple slices of sandwich bread, and then I ate a couple slices of sourdough bread separately, and I kind of just internally measured how they made me feel, especially in my stomach, and the sourdough bread seemed to have nearly no effect at all, whereas the sandwich bread had a bigger effect. And so to me, it seems like removing gluten, if you are suffering from gut issues, could be a good place to start, and then you can kind of like add it back if it doesn't seem to be the culprit. So I promise those are the last things I'm going to say to stop doing as far as what's going in your mouth. But now it's about the timing of what's going in your mouth. What I noticed, I have this handy little ring here called an Oura ring that I absolutely love. It tracks your sleep and a bunch of other metrics. But I noticed that when I ate a couple hours before bed, my resting heart rate would be about 10 beats a minute higher throughout the evening. So let's say my resting heart rate when I was sleeping is at 55. If I was eating maybe a little ice cream or just a later meal, I would have a 65 beats a minute heart rate throughout the entire night, just because I think my body's working harder to digest that food. So it would disrupt my sleep a bit, and I'm just sort of not fully rested. And it doesn't seem super wise to go to sleep when your body's still trying to digest food. So I shifted my eating window. My dinners ended at least 4 hours before I go to bed. And I try to have nearly nothing before I go to bed. I don't even have water before I go to bed. That made a pretty big difference because I remember there's times where I was just kind of sleeping on the bed, imagine I'm horizontal like this, and then I'd have like acid reflux, like kind of coming up my throat, and I'd wake up thinking I was choking, and it was just super miserable way to live because then I would not be able to go back to sleep. So I felt bad and I was tired the next day. So changing that eating window really helped me. So that's timing, but what about size, meal size? I used to be a 2-meal-a-day guy where I'd have either big breakfast, lunch, no dinner, or a big lunch, dinner, maybe a little bit of dessert, but not a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So what I tried is just lessening the amount of food I ate per meal and just eating more meals, and that really did help. I don't know exactly why this works, but I think it's just because there's less things to digest, so it takes less long, gives the system a little bit more time to rest, or perhaps just there's less complexity in the digestive process when you eat smaller meals, so that helped me a ton. And then we get to exercise. I'd have these periods where I would exercise a lot or not at all, and there wasn't a lot of consistency in that, and adding this type of exercise has helped me maintain consistency while not feeling like I'm wasting time not being productive, which is kind of a different problem for me to solve. Sometimes I feel like if I'm at the gym, I can't be working, I can't be on my grind, but I just started walking on a walking pad. If I'm here at the office, I have a standing desk, it comes up, and I just walk during my meetings, or most often, I'll take a walk in the mornings, or I'll go to the gym and just walk around the walking track, crank out some podcasts, crank out some emails, have a couple phone calls. So I feel like I'm still being productive, but I'm moving the body. I think walking is probably the most underrated exercise of all time. I try to get 10,000 steps a day minimum these days. I shoot for 15 to 20,000, which is surprisingly easy if you have a walking treadmill and a job that requires you to be at a desk a lot. But for the gut, it seems like it just kind of stimulated my overall body more. I was exercising more consistently. I had this sort of low-level baseline of activity that I was doing throughout the day, and my body just responded well to it. And then we get to the hard one. This one is stress management. In fact, a couple years ago, I remember asking my girlfriend, I was like, what is stress? How would you define it? How would you know if you were actually stressed? And she kind of looked at me incredulously and was like, what are you talking about? Like, of course you know what stress is. And I think I did in a dictionary definition, but I didn't understand how to detect it within my own body. And now I do. And so I realized, holy shit, I think I've been stressed this whole time. I think I've been stressed for years, at least at a low level. And so what I thought is just, oh, it's a mental condition. Oh, you just have like a bad day, you're a little bit stressed. No, it actually takes a physical toll on the body, especially low level chronic stress that is not addressed. And that can have impacts on your gut. I'm no expert. I don't know the exact sort of scientific tie to how that all gets together, but it does. And so what I tried to do were activities that help to lower my stress. And I got this really wrong at the start. I thought, oh, I'll Netflix and chill, no big deal. Turn my brain off, I'll just watch a show. It doesn't really work that way. You have to do what I call a present moment forcing function activity. You don't have to be in the present moment when you are binging Netflix. You can be thinking about anything. A lot of us are actually on our phones with the screen in front of us. We're double screening it. But I started carving wood with a friend of mine, just whittling wood. You gotta pay attention when you are whittling wood, otherwise you will slice your finger open. And I've done that before too. And so it forces you into the present moment with a tactile task. And what I've found is I didn't have the need to reach for my phone. I felt this sense of calm wash over me. I was with a friend, chatting, shooting the shit, just kind of having a good time. And I got a cool little figurine or spoon or something out there afterwards. So the very first time I did this, 3-4 hours flew by like nothing. In a flow state, I guess you could say. And I noticed that after those 3 to 4 hours happened, I felt calmer. I felt better, even though there was a lot of stuff going on in my life. And so to me, doing active activities that force you into the present moment, ideally that are physical in nature, can help reduce stress, which does seem to have an impact on the gut. Now, those are a lot of things that I stopped doing or started doing, but there's a few rules that I kind of didn't follow at all because I wanted some sense of freedom. I wanted the ability to keep doing this for the long term. And the first one is I stopped tracking calories completely, and I just gave myself freedom to eat whatever I wanted as long as it followed the rules that I just shared with you. So if there wasn't any added sugar or alcohol or gluten, and if it was made of a whole food, protein forward, maybe a protein rich meal, I could have as much as I want of it. If I wanted steak and potatoes, I could just eat that until I was completely stuffed. But funny how it works, if you're eating a bunch of whole foods, it's actually hard to eat too many of them. It's hard to overeat that type of food. It's easy to overeat a bunch of Funyuns and pizza and burritos. It's hard to overeat rich, whole foods. And if it's hard to overeat them, you don't run into some of the gut issues that we've talked about. And then I just allowed myself to have a vice. I love coffee. I love going to the coffee shop, grabbing a cappuccino, trying out new coffee shops, making my own pour over from fancy beans at my house. I wasn't going to give that up. So I think during this particular period where I was doing all these experiments, my caffeine intake probably doubled, and I was completely fine with it because I was doing so many other positive changes that I was okay trading off the caffeine thing for a while, and I didn't notice that it had a huge impact on gut health. So with all these changes combined, I went from having gut issues nearly every single day of my life to only having them when I violate those rules, and it only took 2-ish weeks to see some of those changes express themselves. And I can't tell you how much better I started to feel psychologically, mentally, and emotionally. I felt like I was kind of whole again and I could live a full life, which is just wild to say, but the second brain, the stomach down here, really does control a lot about how you feel about your life. So if you have any tips that have worked for you, shoot them down below. I am always looking for different things that I can try out. Hope you enjoyed. See you on the next one.